A very good evening to you, and thank you very much for tuning into Metropol TV. Thursdays are for Metropol Debrief, and that's the reason why we are here today. What do we have lined up for you on the show? We will be analyzing the revenue sharing bill standoff and finding out what is in it for counties and what does it mean for counties. I will be joined by phenomenal guests in the second part of the show, but right about now, let's start this show. And where do we start it? According to a press release by the Council of Governors dated 17th June, quote, "This is to bring to your attention that county governments have no funds to perform any functions," end of quote. Now, the press release went on to state that barely 2 weeks to the end of the fiscal year 2018-2019, the National Treasury was yet to disburse 32% of the county's equitable share of revenue worth 100 billion Kenya shillings of the total 314 billion approved by Parliament. Now, this means that counties might not have money. Now, health services through the payment of commodities from KEMSA and other commodity suppliers amounting to 5 billion Kenya shillings, agriculture support towards extension services and subsidy for fertilizer 5 billion, provision of clean water services amounting to 10 billion Kenya shillings, infrastructure development and administrative services at 35 billion Kenya shillings. And these numbers, look at these numbers. And finally, operation, maintenance and running of county governments at 45 billion Kenya shillings. This is the state of counties. If you don't give them that money, then that means that nothing is going to go on in the counties. Now, these are some of the challenges that counties have had to face and continue to face 9 years on since the inception of the new constitution. However, on the flip side, devolution has had its good days. Let's be honest with each other. Revenue has been allocated before and utilized. Some counties have benefited greatly from projected development through the development kitty. Some, well, let's see. In relation to the allocation of funds to the county levels, in the fiscal year 2019-2020, the government allocated a total of 335,070,000,000. That's amounting to 335 billion Kenya shillings. The highest amount of allocations to counties include Nairobi, which got 16,888,201 Kenya shillings. Kakamega got 11 billion. Nakuru got 11 billion. And those are just among the counties that got the highest allocation. Now, let's move to the counties that got the lowest allocation. And we begin with Lamu, that got 2.7 billion Kenya shillings. Elgeyo Marakwet follows at 4.1 billion Kenya shillings. And Laikipia at 4.5 billion Kenya shillings. Now, moving on to total expenditure for the fiscal year 2018-2019, the estimated was a total of 463 billion Kenya shillings. Now, in relation to expenditure, a total of 136 billion 980 million was spent. Now, how was it broken down? 112 billion 252 million 460 billion went to recurrent expenditure, while 24.7 billion Kenya shillings went to development. Look at that contrast. Do we still have those numbers? 112 billion for recurrent expenditure, and development only gets 24 billion shillings. This means a lot of money, a lot of your tax money is going into paying bills at the county, paying salaries, and just a fraction of this is going into development. This is about 4 times or 5 times less than what goes into recurrent expenditure. Yet, it should be the other way around. And this is a very interesting conversation we shall be picking up with the panelists in the second part. Now, the absorption rate of the recurrent expenditure stood at 40.61%, contrary to development, which only stood at 13%. Now, among the counties with the highest recurrent expenditure, the guys who are paying guys salaries include Nairobi at 9.3 billion Kenya shillings, Kiambu at 4.2 billion, and Nakuru at 4.1 billion. Now, the lowest counties include Isiolo at 946 million, Lamu at 842 million, and Embu at 1.3 billion Kenya shillings. Now, we can talk about recurrent expenditure and those guys that are not getting it right, but they're guys who are getting it right. In relation to development kitty, Kakamega spent 1.58 billion. They exhausted their kitty in the development kitty, followed by Mandera at 1.56 billion. And finally, Kitui at 1.4 billion Kenya shillings. Now, the counties that spent the lowest in the development kitty include Isiolo. Now, listen to this, you guys. Isiolo spent 0. shillings. Contrast to its estimated 2.1 billion, followed by Kericho that spent 38.94 million, contrast to the estimated 2.7 billion, and finally Lamu that spent 55 million, contrast to the estimated 1.89 billion. Now, among the success stories of devolution include a 200 bed, out of 200 bed, 120 are adults, 80 are neonates, maternity hospitals in Makueni County. The facility has been constructed in phases for the last 4 years at a cost of 135 million, which both include construction and equipment. Wait, pause. Most of the time when we hear about these projects, they cost billions. Makueni County showed us it can be done at 135 million Kenya shillings. Now, among the services that will be offered there include consultation services, gynecological, obstetric, neonatal services, among many others, for mothers who are not able to cater for expensive labor treatments. Now, moving on very swiftly, there are counties also that have done well. Kakamega, we've seen the pictures, and also Kisumu. I don't know if we have those pictures. Well, there you have it. Kisumu has been tipped to be one of the cleanest counties, and Kisumu governor says the money is being allocated in just basic services in the county. Kakamega County, we saw the Buhungu Stadium. That's the picture right there. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a clearer picture, but this is how Buhungu Stadium looks like, you guys. So there are counties that have really done well for themselves. And this is a conversation that we want to pick right from where we began on the revenue sharing bill standoff. We'll be discussing that. We will be discussing revenue allocation to the counties. Is it time for counties to start raising their own revenue and furnishing their own revenue basket? We'll also talk about matters of corruption at the county. How is it that counties are not accountable? We'll talk about recurrent expenditure versus development kitty, among so much more. That is in the second segment. Right about now, we want to take a short breather. When we come back, my guests join me in studio. Stay with Metropol TV. A very good evening to you. When we sit down, it's time for that conversation. And that conversation tonight, dear viewer, entails the revenue sharing bill standoff that we are currently witnessing between Parliament and Senate, and the person in between that is suffering are the counties. Joining me in studio, Benjamin Wema, who's a devolution consultant, and Christina Kinyi, who's the program lead at TISA. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for making time today. I am saying thank you for making time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. No. The conversation is very heavy that everyone is guarded. And
no.
Yeah?
We are not guarded.
Yeah.
We are happy to be here.
Okay.
And we want to say hello to your viewers and tell them that we are going to share as much as we can with them.
Great. Yeah. And just to start off this conversation, even before we came on air, we were having a very light discussion, and it touched on the issue of the revenue sharing bill standoff that we are witnessing. It's Parliament locking horns with Senate and the people being caught in between other counties. What are your 2 cents? Let's start with you, John. Benjamin, rather, sorry.
Yes. The issue has taken a political dimension. Initially, it was a process whereby the Commission of Revenue Allocation makes a proposal, which should then be adopted by the Senate, and then it has to have the concurrence of the National Assembly. When that does not happen, then you have to have a committee that does some mediation between the 2 houses and come up with a solution as to how much, then they can agree. Okay. Then the bill will go back to the both houses to be passed, then it becomes law. But in this instance, it is rather unfortunate that they have failed to come to an agreement, and according to the Constitution and the law, that the bill fails, meaning now we don't have a bill, and which means that money to the counties cannot be disbursed until that bill is passed by Parliament and assented to by the President. However, the counties can still get 50% of that money. But the issue here for me is a bit more than just the argument between the two houses. We have to accept as a country that devolution is here to stay with us.
Okay.
It's not an event, it's a process that will take a long time, and we must nurture it. And we cannot have nurture devolution without adequate resources to be able to run devolution.
And this issue of resources is coming up now, but these are loopholes that we did not see in the Constitution when we were promulgating it. We are only beginning to see it now, and whether we like it or not, devolution is here to stay, as he has said. Parliament and Senate have to find a middle ground for the sake of the counties. What do you have to say?
I don't think that we didn't know that this was going to happen, because there's been this division of revenue has been a contentious issue since the commencement of the implementation of devolution. Parliament, National Assembly and Senate have always been disagreeing on how much money should go to counties. So you find that the National Assembly always sides with the National Treasury, and the Senate always sides with the Commission on Revenue Allocation. And Senate, the main role of Senate is to protect the interests of county governments, and CRA always makes a higher recommendation for monies to go to counties compared to the National Treasury.
Okay.
So this issue has always been an issue of contention. So it's not a surprise that there's a stalemate. Yes.
And 50%, they get 50%. They can run some services. But as we've just seen with the numbers, there's 100 billion out. How does this go into crippling certain services at the county, bearing in mind that right now there are certain services that are devolved or certain government functions?
This financial year has a few days left. Even if you are to send this money to the counties now, they can't spend it because there is no time to spend the money. So as we move forward as a country, we must find a way of making sure, one, this money gets to the counties in time so that it can be utilized for the purposes that it has been budgeted for. That is one. And two, to make sure that when that money goes there, we have created the necessary checks and balances, the necessary infrastructure, management structure to be able to make sure that those funds are safeguarded. They are used for the purposes that they have been budgeted for. Now, the issue of the Senate and the National Assembly is a political issue. And this is an issue that has been getting worse, because if you go back, the Senate last week decided on the floor of the Senate to take the National Assembly to court over issues of bills that have been passed, 18 bills that have been passed without the input of the Senate. I read in the papers today, the National Assembly is reciprocating in kind. And they have now a bill that is going to come on the floor of the House so that they can also sue the Senate. Now, when we have this volatile and political climate that is not conducive to working together for the interests of, one, the country, and two, for devolution, then we have a problem that needs to be sorted out between the two houses.
And you're saying the national government is holding on to money. There are certain government functions that have been devolved. Why does the national government feel the need to hold on to that money, yet it's not the one that is performing the basic functions? Christine?
I think the first problem, the first mistake that we made as a country was that after the Constitution was enacted, there was supposed to be a process of unbundling and costing of functions so that we know how much does it cost to deliver some functions. The process of unbundling and costing of functions has never been completed, and I think that's a major contribution to this fight between the national government and the county government. We find that there's duplication of roles. So it's not clear who is supposed to do what and how much money should go to which level of government to implement which functions. So that process needs to be complete so that when revenue is being allocated, it's allocated based on to enable counties to deliver their functions. And also they know that for us, these are the functions we're supposed to implement, and the national government is clear on which functions they are to implement.
And speaking of functions and clarity of functions, a function like agriculture that is devolved, we do not know where it stands. The national government has one stand, the county government has another stand when it comes to paying of maize farmers, buying of produce, subsidy of fertilizer. Where do we stand with these functions, Mwema?
It is occluded. It is not clear because, as she says, that process was not completed. If you look, we had this committee that was supposed to harmonize the transition from, you know, the national government to county governments and so forth and so forth. It was chaired by someone, Kinuthia Mwangi. I don't think they finished what they were meant to do. Somewhere along the line, their time expired without them having finished the function that they were supposed to do. Now, these functions were now given to another committee that is domiciled under the Ministry of Devolution and Asal. How far they have gone with that is something that I'm not privy to. But when it comes to the devolution of functions, look at health, for example. I think it's the most glaring. The health is a devolved function. Yet, we hear that most of the money remains with the ministry. But the counties are supposed to be running that devolved function. Now, there is no clarity or demarcation on who is doing what, and therefore you end up with these labor problems that you are seeing everywhere, doctors being sacked, and the people who suffer are the mwananchi, the grassroots. So therefore, although in any process there are teething problems, I think devolution have moved to a point whereby we should not be seeing these things anymore. These are things that we should have finished with, and we should be moving forward to make it better as we move forward. So therefore, we need to look into these matters, because as we move forward, it is going to get more difficult to make sure that the things you are talking about, agriculture and others, are not done. And if they are not done, then we end up with in a situation whereby there is not enough rain, we don't have enough food, we don't have fertilizer, because nobody knows who is supposed to do what.
Christine, how do we streamline this?
I think the process of unbundling and costing on functions must be completed first, so that we know that what it costs to implement these functions. So I believe that the Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee is the one which is in charge of that process. So they need to hasten that process so that we have clarity on who is doing what. Secondly, the national government is not in support of devolution, in my opinion, because if they had the political will for devolution to work, they would have followed the law, as it says. The unbundling and costing of function is a very key stage for devolution to work in Kenya. So that process needs to be complete. Yes.
And you know, most of the time when we pass these bills, they're very rosy on paper, but they relate to the people, right? And one of our reporters went out to the field and had a conversation with you guys just to understand, what do you think about the revenue sharing standoff, and what you make out of it? What are some of the dangers of enough funds trickling down to the county level? And if enough funds are not trickling down to the county level, then what are some of the dangers, and what are some of the benefits of enough funds trickling down to the county level? And I think she also touched on corruption at the county level. Listen in. Well, looks like we're having a little bit of technical challenges here and there. Well, when our director is ready with that video, he will let us know. But just to pick up on this conversation on where we left it, these functions that have been devolved, right? We are seeing there's that push and pull, push and pull, push and pull, and it goes down to revenue allocation. We are seeing the national government is equally not allocating enough funds even to devolve functions. A function like health, you've just said, you mentioned the national government is holding on to funds, yet doctors are working at the county level. With agriculture, they're not even sure.
Well, it's really a problem that needs to be tackled. And you see, as she rightly says, if you don't know how much it costs, how will you budget for it?
Yeah.
Really, that is the starting point. And any political process, and this is a political process, has checks and balances. In that, in as much as the national government will say publicly, we want devolution to be well done and everything to be rosy and so forth, they would not like to give so much money to the counties so that they become so independent, because it is a political tool to be able to control the country. And so that is something else that must also be at the back of our mind as we go through this. However, politics cannot be eaten. So somewhere along the line, we have to bite the bullet and make sure that these functions are devolved, they are costed, and we know how much they cost, and we budget the money so that then the counties can function properly.
Christine?
Yeah, I believe also that both the national government and the county government need to cooperate and consult in terms of just to have clarity on who is performing what. And then if you read the 4th schedule of the Constitution, it clearly lists down the functions of the national government and functions of the county government. And you see that the national government is mainly responsible for policy formulation. County governments are are responsible for implementation and service delivery. So that needs to be taken in consideration when unbundling and costing these functions. Yes. So there's need for the national and county government to consult and agree who is doing what, even when they're coming up with these bills and policies, so that it's clear. Yes.
Okay, great. Now, we still want to bring in people into this conversation, and as our team is trying to find that video, we want to bring in Twitter and what you're saying on Twitter. We have one Dano Curry here who says, the national government is twisting the counties by not releasing funds so as to have them dance to their tune. Mwema?
Well, that is precisely what I'm saying. It's politics. Politics, money and power go together. And as much as the counties will have to fight for this, it is not going to be given to them on a silver platter.
Yeah.
They have to go out there and fight for it and make sure that they have the support of the people that they are governing, so that the national government then is under pressure to be able to release some of these funds to them so that they can do what they must do.
Christine?
Yes, I believe that the national government is trying to claw back devolution by denying funds to counties. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed. And yes.
Okay, we have another tweet here saying, so Isiolo got an allocation. This is by Tricia at _Nyaga. So Isiolo got an allocation in the development kitty of 2.1 billion Kenya shillings, but spent 0. Yet governors want more funds. Christine, can I start with you on that one?
Okay, I think it needs to be clear when was this money, when did they receive this money?
The 2018-2019 financial year. One
of the issues that came up in the Council of Governors press statement is that there's about 100 billion that has not been released to county governments, which is about 32%. And according to my understanding, the money that is given to counties, 70% is to go to recurrent expenditure and 30% to development. So if you do your math well, they're saying that so far they've received 68%, and they're still waiting for 32%, which is even less than what is supposed to go to recurrent expenditure. So we need to ask the question, when was this money released to county governments for them to even have time to spend it?
Okay. Mwema, your thoughts?
The issue of spending that money is a critical issue, because we are still talking about capacity. Some counties, when we devolved, had capacity in capital, in human capital. Some counties don't have a capacity in human capital. So even if they were to roll out their projects, their programs, and their systems within the county, it was difficult because of lack of human capacity.
Mwema, allow me to play devil's advocate. Even if you don't have capacity, 2.1 billion Kenya shillings, 0.
I am not saying it's a good thing. I'm trying to put it in perspective.
But you want to say the whole Isiolo County has no experts?
I'm not saying that. They have. But maybe they do not have they have no capacity to do it the right way. And therefore, because if you look at these budgets, most of these budgets are recurrent. More than 70% of them are recurrent.
Yeah.
And where does most of it go? Salaries. So does it mean that then we have so many people working for the county, yet we don't have people to come and do the things that make this money be spent?
Solid point.
There is a disconnect between these two parts, the recurrent and the development.
Okay.
And therefore, the development money may not be spent, but as long as they spent the recurrent, they're okay with that. But then if you look at the aspirations of devolution, it's bringing up the livelihoods of the people within that county. How do you bring those livelihoods up when you don't spend the money for development? Because development is what changes their lives, but not recurrent.
But I don't understand. How is it that you have 2.1 billion Kenya shillings?
I can't answer that because I have no clue. I have no idea.
You have no idea?
Yeah, because if I was given that, I would make sure that I spend it to the last coin.
Yeah.
I will never send a cent back. I would make
to
sure
Treasury.
That, yes. I'll make sure that it is spent.
Let's take a look at another tweet here by @Wanjiru Wakaba 1. She says the 450 billion set aside for the Big Four agenda should be allocated to the counties, since that is where most of the legwork is done. Agriculture, affordable healthcare, housing, and manufacturing. Let those funds trickle down to the counties.
That's a good point, because most of those issues that are within the Big Four agenda are devolved functions.
Okay.
If you look at them and go through them with a pen, you find that 90% of them are devolved. Yet the national government is the one that is spending the money. So there again, there's a disconnect. People must sit down and quantify this money and say, look, we need so much money for agriculture. And agriculture is devolved, and the national government has put emphasis on agriculture, production of food, food security. So how do we now interface with the national government to make sure that, because we are the food soldiers of the national government, that we can get the resources to be able to make sure that that is actualized? Yes.
Christine?
Yeah, I support that argument. The Big Four agenda was the president's agenda, and it's considered to be the national interest. However, the chairperson of the Council of Governors came out saying that they were not consulted when the Big Four agenda idea came up. So I fail to understand the reason why that was done. So the Big Four agenda is a good thing, but it needs to be discussed between the national government and the county government, so that it's clear who is implementing what, so that they get enough funds to implement whichever their function is in the Big Four agenda.
Actually, they need a framework. They need a framework, and how they are going to work on it, because it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Yeah. But then when you have an overlap, the central government is doing the same thing the county governments are doing, then this overlap is waste of resources. But if we can have a coordination and a framework within which we engage and make sure that we get the desired results, then it will be easier for everybody, and we will use less resources and focus more on what we need to get done. Yeah.
This is a country of missing targets. KRA misses its target. In the budget, the government didn't have enough money, and counties are equally following suit. They're missing their revenue targets. And I think this is where also the problem comes in, because counties cannot raise enough money to even sustain themselves. They're looking up to the national government. And then when the national government doesn't give them funds, then there's 100 billion deficit and services cannot move on. How do we get counties to start collecting revenue that can furnish their revenue needs at county level, so that whatever the national government decides, counties can sustain themselves?
You know, if you go to the United States and you go to the state of California, the state of California is a state of the United States, but the economy of California is the seventh largest economy in the world, just being part of the United States. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because in our country, we created counties without regard to the economic sustainability of those units.
Okay.
And therefore, as we move forward, we are coming to understand and to find out that some of these units are not economically sustainable. And I think we already, as a nation, we're having a conversation whereby we are saying, look, let's relook at this and maybe group them. We are coming up with these blocks, economic blocks, and so forth and so forth. This is happening automatically because we are finding out that we don't have the capacity to economically sustain certain units. And this is a good thing in my view. This is a conversation we need to have, so that then we can correct the anomalies that we had when we started devolution.
Christine?
What I believe is that the revenue raised nationally is to be shared equitably between the national government and the county government. So county governments are entitled to 15% of the revenue raised nationally. That's the constitutional threshold, and it must be adhered to. However, counties have also been given powers to raise their own source of revenue by the Constitution, which they are not doing it as effectively as they should.
Okay. So
they need to improve on that.
How do they improve?
I cannot answer to that, but ideally they should improve on that.
Now, you know, if you go to other countries, Kenya is not an isolated case. We live in a global village. Go to South Africa. South Africa is bigger than us. The economy is more than 10 times bigger than ours. They only have 9 devolved units. And these units are economically sustainable because even with their taxes, they can sustain themselves up to a certain level. Even so that even when they are topped up from the national kitty, they have capacity of sustenance. And that is important because if you go across the country, the world, and go to Germany and look at the regions and go to you find that at the end of the day, they make enough money to be able to have economic muscle. So if we have units that have no economic muscle, that are just relying on the central government to give them money, then we are not growing what we really want to have at the end of the day. Yes, so we must find a way of amalgamating some of them or creating these blocks so that then within that framework, we can find a way of making sure that we have economically viable devolved units.
Recurrent expenditure, we've seen it. It's
Yes.
a big deal, both at national level and at county level. At national level, 1.7 trillion Kenya shillings went into settling recurrent expenditure. That problem has trickled down to the county. What is the problem, Christine?
I think the issue of wage bill is a serious issue that needs to be addressed. It actually came out during the devolution conference that government is spending a lot of money just paying salaries. So I think the national government and the county government should sit together and discuss how they are going to deal with the issue of this ballooning wage bill. Do we really need all these people? And then the irony is that at the county level, we have they are spending about 70% on recurrent expenditure, yet they're not doing any development. So what are these people doing if there is no development taking place at the county level? So the issue of wage bill should be addressed. It's a national crisis.
Mwema, how do we address this
The issue of the wage bill is a creature of our constitution. We gave ourselves this constitution in 2010. I was there as we did it. And we created too many positions because of the devolved system of government and then the bicameral parliament and so forth and so forth. We created a monster that our economy and our revenue base cannot be able to sustain. So as Kenyans, we must look at each other straight in the eye and say, look, maybe time has come for us to sit down together again and reason and say, look, we may not be able to afford this. Let us reduce this wage bill by doing away with what I don't want to propose, what should be. But at some point, as Kenyans, we will have to sit down and say, look, we cannot sustain this.
But if you listen to what's going on in the political fields, actually the referendum is being called to add more positions to sustain more people.
It is not sustainable. It's not sustainable. You can, okay, there are many ways of doing this. You can add 3 people and reduce 1,000. You know, that is the way I'm looking at it. I'm not saying you should not add a few. You can add 3 and remove 1,000. That makes sense. But it is economics of scale here. And we are looking at this. We must, first of all, put policies on the side and say, look, is it economically viable for us to continue this way? What do we want to leave for our children and grandchildren? A broke country? Or we want to leave something that is sustainable? That is the conversation we must have.
Christine?
But I think there's also another underlying problem, whether the national government got rid of the provincial administration that was in place before the new constitution, because we still have chiefs. So what is their role under the devolved government system? Some of these structures that were there under the old constitution which are still in place, those people are receiving salaries. There's also the issue of very many authorities being created by the national government who are performing devolved functions. Do we still need some of these people, some of these authorities to be in place? Yet they're performing functions that are supposed to be performed by county governments.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd like you...
You know what happened? Let me comment on the provincial administration. You know, when we were crafting this constitution, an issue came up. The issue that the provincial administration, if we were going to scrap them, they were going to go against the constitution, and the constitution was not going to pass. So that area was left amorphous deliberately, so that the provincial administration would support the constitutional process that was adopted in 2010. And therefore, a lacuna was left that can be exploited either way, this way or this way.
Okay.
And that is something that maybe we need to look at. Yes.
Well, hold on to that thought. We'll come back and look at it. But right about now, we want to take a short breather to bring you commercial messages. When we come back, time for you to jump into this conversation on Social Watch. So as we go on that break, log on to our social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Metropol TV KE, Art Ondiro Ganga, hashtag Metropol Debrief. Send in your thoughts, your questions, your comments. When we come back, we shall be sampling that on Social Watch. When it's time for Social Watch, my mic goes off and your voice comes on. We want to take a look at what you're saying on social media. And where do we start today? We start with Twitter, where we ran an opinion poll and we asked you, do you think corruption is impeding growth at the county level? Well, 95% of you said yes, and only 5% said no. Okay, very strong opinions. We asked the same question on Instagram. The results were the same. Let's start with the opinion from Miss Mwajima, who says, corruption is not impeding growth at the counties. It's the allocation of funds to grand projects for the sake of politics rather than investing in programs that are of real-time benefits to Kenyans. Christine, your thoughts?
I believe corruption is a national issue. We should not only focus on corruption at the county level.
Okay.
There's also major corruption at the national government level. So there are vested interests. And yeah, I believe that's the major cause of corruption.
Do you think, Mwema, that Ms. Mojuma is right to say we are just allocating funds to the wrong places?
No. Corruption is a national malaise. It's everywhere. It's not only the counties, it's not national government, it's everywhere. We must deal with it, and it is affecting each and every aspect of our lives in this country. Whether we like it or not, it's a monster we must slay. Yes.
So, okay, those are your thoughts. Let's take a look at another. At Juma Wasike says, corruption is impeding growth at the national level. Yote inakuliwa huko county ni nani? Tukule, tusikule. Christine?
Yes.
Tukule?
No.
Tusikule.
I think the major corruption scandals have been those at the national government level.
Yeah.
If you compare the level of corruption, for instance, in the Ministry of Health, compared to the corruption at maybe a county, just compare and yeah, you'll just see that clearly.
So you're choosing the lesser evil?
I believe corruption should be dealt with as a national issue. And citizens should also hold their leaders accountable.
Okay.
And it's easier to hold your governor accountable compared to holding the ministry accountable. So citizens at the grassroots level should make sure that they hold their county governments accountable. If your governor steals money or misappropriates public funds, hold them accountable. Ask them, what did you do with this money? Yes.
Mwema, tukule, tusikule?
Tusikule, we have to deal with this monster. We have no choice, and it doesn't matter where it is. It is bad for everybody. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for the country. It's bad for the youth. It's bad for the women. It's bad for everybody.
But when you say we must deal with it, we've seen governors getting arrested on Friday. Monday they are arraigned in court, and Tuesday they are back to their homes. Well,
that is a systemic failure which must be dealt with, and it is not upon me really to deal with it, but the people who have the power and the authority that we have conferred on them by our vote must do something to make sure that this does not happen. Okay,
well, let's move on to another social platform, and on WhatsApp, Dennis Kamal says, hunger-stricken leaders. MCS cut past development agenda without being bribed. Development projects have stalled because money meant for them was eaten by who is who in the counties. To get a job in the county, papers matter very little in comparison to how deep in your pockets you are willing to go. A very pertinent issue. When we said devolution, we said we'll devolve services and then try and create more jobs for the youth. But look at this point. Your papers don't matter how deep you're willing to dig in your pocket.
This is something we have had across the country. I think everybody cannot be complaining if there's no truth into it. So I think it's something that everybody in back of their minds know is happening. That is why we have this big wage bill, because people will just sit down and create positions that are not really necessary for running the county, but because there are people who must get jobs in that county, and they are given those jobs. And in that regard, it is retrogressive. It is not good for the country. It is not good for the county.
Christine?
I think as Kenyans, we need to ask ourselves a critical question: who elects these leaders into government? It's us who elect corrupt leaders, so the buck falls on us. Yes, we should start by electing leaders who we know are ethical and have integrity. Otherwise, if we continue electing corrupt leaders, then what do you expect?
What do you expect indeed? Let's take a look at another reaction. At Leteipan Gina says, no. If enough revenue is allocated to counties, then there will be money for development projects. Corruption is not stealing from the counties. It's just there aren't enough funds to do development.
But you have just told us that they are taking the money back. So there we go again.
Yeah, there we go again. A very contrasting situation. When you're given money, you don't utilize it. When you're not given money, you can't develop.
Yeah.
When you're given some money, it allegedly goes into projects that cannot be explained. Christine?
Yes, I think I believe that one of the reasons Kenyans wanted a devolved system of government is so that they can influence development outcomes. So even as citizens, what role are we playing to ensure that the projects we want are the ones which are prioritized?
Okay.
We don't just leave it to county government to decide, oh, us, we want to do this project. That's how they ensure that they find ways to benefit from maybe public procurement deals. So as citizens, we need to be vigilant. We need to participate in all the budget processes, even in coming up with the county, CIDPs. Yeah, so we need to be at the forefront. We tell the county governments these are the projects that we want you to implement, and if not, tell us the reason why you don't want to implement these projects. So that once we know the projects that have been prioritized, then we continuously monitor so that we ensure that these projects are implemented.
Okay.
But public participation has been stifled. Things are still happening the same old way. You know, people, you just see a project coming up, and you know, look at the people in Lamu. About the core project. It has been stopped because there was literally no public participation. The days that were given, it never happened. The days that were given were not the right days. They changed the days and so forth and so forth. So there is an issue that is in our constitution, that public participation is a cornerstone of our government system. And therefore, we must make sure that as citizens, we make enough noise to make sure that public participation becomes part of our governance system.
I hear you, gentlemen. Now, let's go to Twitter. And where do we start? With Stephanie Wasra. If government services are now offered at the county, why shouldn't the bulk of national income be allocated to the counties? This is an issue we touched on. Yeah, let's take a look at another tweet. Trisha Nyaga says, what steps are going forward towards the revenue being put on roads and transportation as concerned by many residents in Nairobi, and how will it be improved? I think this goes to the issue where Nairobi has the highest recurrent expenditure, yet we are not seeing very much on the development front apart from the lions at the roundabouts.